Hello, Camden Coblentz here. So the weather here has brought snow on the ground, and it's put me in a good mood. It only feels appropriate for this episode to focus on a movie that takes place during winter. That movie is Frozen. So, if you were expecting me to talk about the Disney film, you might be disappointed. This movie is from 2010, and in terms of mood, it's in the opposite direction. So with that, let's begin. This movie's story revolves around three characters: Dan Walker, his girlfriend Parker O'Neill, and Dan's best friend from childhood, Joe Lynch. They spend most of their day at a skiing resort on a Sunday, though Joe is upset that Parker came along, and he now feels like a third wheel and that Parker's inexperience is keeping them from thoroughly enjoying the day, though he denies it. He tells Dan that he's eager to go for a run like the two of them had done years before to end their time there. That evening, the resort staff plans to close early due to rough weather on the way. But the three leads convince the ski lift attendant to let them go for one last run, insisting that it would be really quick. He gives in, but is called to his boss's office, so he tells his temporary replacement that there are 3 more people on the ski lift. But soon after the employee replaces him, 3 other people return from the hill. Assuming that they are the 3 he was told about, he shuts off the ski lift. It suddenly stops with Dan, Joe, and Parker still on board. At first they assume it's a technical difficulty, since it happened earlier that day, but after a bit, the lights shut off. Then they panic, realizing that they are stranded. With the resort being closed till Friday, and the 3 of them stuck on the lift many feet above the ground in the freezing weather, with the threat of freezing to death, they know they are in trouble. Not long after, the weather becomes more fierce, and a snowcat drives by close to the ski lift. They yell for help, but of course, they aren't heard above the noise. The driver gets close to where they are, but is then called to head back to base. With none of the 3 friends having their cell phones with them, as they left them in lockers at the resort, they are running out of options. With that, Dan decides to jump from the chair to find help, but Joe and Parker try to stop him as they are too far above the ground. But Dan refuses to listen to them and jumps, even though he is frightened. He hits the ground hard, severely breaking both of his legs. The scent of blood attracts a wolf, and Parker throws her snowboard at it to scare it away. Joe tries to help Dan by climbing across the cables, but they are razor sharp, cutting through his gloves and hands, and he soon heads back. Unfortunately, an entire pack of wolves arrive, and Joe and Parker, unable to help Dan, turn their heads away in horror as their friend is brutally devoured. Soon after Dan's death, we get a very realistic scene involving the remaining 2. Parker tells Joe that he should have stopped Dan from jumping, even though he did discourage him from doing it, and nothing was going to stop him. Joe is startled, then he believes that she wished he would have died instead of Dan. He gets angry, reminding her that he had known Dan for nearly his whole life unlike her. Then he blames her for coming with them and failing so much at snowboarding that the 2 of them couldn't accomplish as much as they did before. Then they realize that they both overreacted, and they apologize to each other and try to make the best of it for the night. The next morning, their conditions have gotten worse in the frigid weather. Without much hope left, Joe reflects on some of his memories, and he shares them with Parker, including a childhood memory of when he first met Dan, and the barrier between them continues to close. Not wanting to freeze to death, Joe tries once again to climb the cables. He climbs on the chair to reach them, but in the process, the chair's support screw comes loose, putting Parker in more danger. Joe painfully makes it across to the nearest pole, and makes it to the ground. But his bloody hands have attracted more wolves. Joe is attacked, but then defends himself with his ski pole, and slides on one of his skis to find help, with the wolves in pursuit of him. The next day arrives, and Joe hasn't returned. Then the screw comes off, causing the chair to fall before being supported by the cables, which also come loose. Parker jumps off, the cables break, and the chair falls to the ground, hitting her foot. Weak, she crawls away from the resort. Soon she comes across Joe's dead body, with the wolves still at his corpse. Parker keeps still, and the wolves continue focusing on Joe's body. Parker makes it to a nearby road, and eventually someone stops to help. She is rescued and taken on her way to the hospital. Then the movie ends. Yeah, I honestly feel like it could have continued on for a bit longer. I can imagine that the ski resort got into some serious trouble after the events in the movie took place, and it would have been interesting to see how it would happen. It also could have been meaningful to end with gravestones being made for Dan and Joe, and Parker visiting their gravesite. I guess that's just me nitpicking about when some movies have a short ending. So that was Frozen. The other Frozen. The Disney film is not my type of movie, so I would say that this one is better, but it's kind of a hard movie to watch. I find it interesting that it has been categorized in the horror genre in some cases, because it doesn't feel like one. It's a horrible situation for sure, but it's not a scary movie, and there's no villain. The other genre it has fallen into is the thriller genre, and that's fitting. It's certainly one of the most depressing movies I've ever seen, with some very disturbing sequences, but at the same time, it gave me a lot to think about in terms of spiritual thinking. Concerning the three main characters, they are definitely not role models, as they are not very wise and they played a big part in getting into the film's disaster. But at the same time, I didn't want them to die. That's where I need to give credit to this movie. As a Christian, I realize that there have been so many people that have died in the past, having never accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior. Even though these were fictional characters, I kept thinking about their eternal fate, and I became compassionate for them, even though it was obvious that there was nothing I could do. There's a certain movie that started getting me thinking about where people were destined to end up in eternity, and Frozen continued that thought process. This movie was also a big reminder that death is inevitable for everyone until Jesus returns, and everyone is taken to heaven or hell for eternity. But death can come so unexpectedly, and the movie gives a clear example of that. It starts off as a fairly light-hearted movie, but as soon as they get trapped on the ski lift, the whole tone takes a drastic shift, and I appreciate the realism of that. The whole movie feels quite realistic. Out of the characters, I found that my favorite was Joe. He starts off as a character who tries to make the best of disappointment in serious situations. But after Dan's death, he really becomes much more serious about things, and he feels like the most developed character in the film. His death was the saddest to me. All the characters felt very real. I've said this before, but there's hope for anyone who repents of their sins to God, trusts in Jesus Christ as their Savior, believes in the truth revealed in the Bible, and lives out their faith by believing in God and living for Him. There's only one way to heaven, and I want to do my part to make the real truth known. No one knows when they are going to die, so please know that there is hope for avoiding eternal torment for sins. For those who choose to turn from their old ways and become a child of God, there's no need to fear death. With all those things being said, I think Frozen holds some significance. So thanks for taking the time here, and please subscribe for more videos. I hope the truth can continue to stand.